Back in the 90s, life felt so much simpler. I remember those days filled with cassette tapes and the excitement of my first car, a bright blue Honda Civic. I loved that little car like it was a loyal companion. There was something special about the feeling of independence it gave me, a ticket to freedom I had longed for. Every weekend, I would take it for long drives, enjoying the open road and the adventures it promised. Little did I know that one particular night would change my view of safety forever. As I pulled out of my driveway one crisp evening, the fresh night air filled my lungs. It was invigorating, a reminder that the world outside was alive with possibilities. I had two routes to choose from. One was faster but passed through a sketchy area known for trouble, while the other was a winding road that took longer but offered breathtaking views. On that starry night, I decided to take the scenic route, craving the beauty of the landscape over the speed of the road. The winding road was famous for its curves, and it also boasted some of the most beautiful sights I had ever seen. As I navigated the twists and turns, I marveled at the stars twinkling above, feeling as though I was the only person in the world at that moment. The night was alive with the sounds of crickets chirping and leaves rustling gently in the breeze. It was peaceful, a sharp contrast to the chaos of my busy workdays. As I continued driving, time slipped away from me. The moonlight illuminated the road ahead, casting a magical glow over the trees lining the way. I rolled down my window, allowing the cool breeze to brush against my face. It was one of those rare moments where everything felt perfect until it wasn't. Suddenly, as I rounded a particularly sharp curve, something caught my eye in the middle of the road. My heart raced. I slowed down, straining to see what it was. As I got closer, I realized it looked like a silhouette of a person standing still, almost frozen in time. My stomach twisted in knots as I drew nearer. It appeared that they were carrying something long and heavy. When I finally recognized it was a rifle, a chill shot down my spine. I had heard stories of people lurking on this road, waiting for unsuspecting drivers to either kidnap or carjack them. Panic surged through me as warning bells rang loud in my mind. I didn't want to take any chances, so I quickly turned my car around, adrenaline coursing through my veins. As I retraced my path, I glanced in the rearview mirror. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. They were still far enough away, but the sight filled me with dread. The curvy road limited my speed, and I pushed down on the pedal, willing my little Honda to go faster. My heart pounded in my chest as I focused on the road ahead, desperate to escape. The thought of reaching the gas station at the beginning of the road became my singular goal. I figured if I could just make it there, I would be safe. But the headlights behind me grew closer, tightening the knot in my stomach. I could only go so fast on these winding roads. As the distance between us closed, I could hear the car behind me honking its horn. I glanced at the speedometer and realized I was already pushing my limits. My mind raced with questions. Who was this person? Why were they following me? Was it just a coincidence? Or did they really mean to chase me? The headlights kept getting closer, and panic surged through me. I had to escape. Just then, I spotted the bright lights of the gas station coming into view. A surge of hope flooded me, but my relief was short-lived as the car behind me accelerated too. I could feel my heart racing even faster than the car itself. When I finally reached the gas station, I whipped my car into the parking lot, tires squealing. I slammed the car into park and let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The headlights behind me suddenly turned off, and for a moment, everything felt eerily quiet. I peered into the dark, scanning the area for any sign of danger. The tension hung thick in the air. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, heart still pounding. I was too scared to get out of my car. What if they were waiting for me? I glanced around, and the gas station that was supposed to be a haven felt oddly unsettling. The flickering neon sign cast strange shadows, and the wind howled through the empty parking lot, making me shiver. Eventually, I mustered enough courage to step out. I needed to refuel anyway. With my heart racing, I walked cautiously to the gas pump, eyes darting around for any signs of trouble. The night felt too quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. Just then, I saw a figure in the distance, someone standing by their car, looking my way. My heart sank as I realized it was the same car that had been tailing me. Panic surged once more, and I quickly moved back to my car, my instincts screaming for me to get away. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, my gut telling me to act fast. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, the figure finally got into their car and drove off, leaving me feeling both relieved and confused. After that night, I never took that road again. The stories I heard from others who had similar experiences confirmed my fears. I was grateful that I had turned around before it was too late. God knows what could have happened if I hadn't listened to my instincts. As weeks passed, my work schedule often had me getting off late around 1 or 2 a.m. The drive home was usually quiet and peaceful, allowing me to unwind after a long day. I took the same route home, one I knew like the back of my hand, but it always felt creepier at that hour. The darkness seemed to stretch endlessly, and every sound felt amplified in the silence. One night, about 10 minutes from home, I made my last turn into my neighborhood. Everything felt normal at first. I was looking forward to getting home, curling up with a good book, and relaxing after a long day. But as I drove, I noticed a blinking light down the road. At first, I thought it might be someone who had broken down, and I felt a mix of concern and caution. As I slowed down, the blinking light suddenly disappeared, leaving me enveloped in heavy silence. Just then, a small van pulled out in front of me, blocking my path. I barely had time to react, and before I knew it, I tapped the rear of the van. Shock washed over me. I couldn't believe I had just been in a minor accident. Not knowing what to do, I got out to check for damage. Thankfully, there wasn't much. My car was fine, and the van looked okay too. 2 people sat inside the van, and after a moment, the driver, a heavy-set older man, stepped out. He approached me, and a strange unease settled in the air between us. "Are you all right?" I asked, trying to gauge the situation, but he wouldn't make eye contact. His eyes darted around as if he was scanning the area for something or someone. "Yes, we're fine," he finally replied. But his response felt off, almost rehearsed, as if he had been preparing for this moment. His strange demeanor made me uncomfortable, and I instinctively took a step back toward my car. "I just want to check for damages," he said, waving a hand dismissively. I watched as he turned to look inside the van, feeling increasingly uneasy. What were they hiding? What felt like a long minute passed as he inspected the van, and I began to regret getting out of my car. I glanced at the passenger side, but only saw a shadowy figure sitting there, completely still. My mind raced with questions. Why was this guy acting so weird? Did they want something from me? Then, the passenger door swung open, and the second man stepped out. Panic gripped me, and I jumped back into my car, locking the door before I even thought twice about it. The older man continued looking around, and I felt my heart race as both of them began waving their arms in front of my car, signaling for me to stop. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of there. I put my car in drive and sped around them, not daring to look back. As I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw their headlights flick on. They were coming after me. Adrenaline pumped through my veins as I drove faster, the road ahead blurring past me. The fog thickened, making it hard to see where I was going. I felt lost and panicked, desperate to put as much distance as possible between us. In a state of fear, I drove toward the nearest 7-Eleven, hoping it would provide me with a safe refuge. I pulled into the parking lot, my heart still pounding in my chest. I parked my car, holding my breath as I waited to see if they would follow. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, eyes glued to the entrance of the parking lot. I felt like a deer caught in headlights, my heart racing with fear and uncertainty. After about 5 long minutes, I finally exhaled when I saw their van pass by, continuing down the road without stopping. Relief washed over me, but I was still shaken. What had just happened? Why were they acting so strangely? I couldn't shake the feeling that they had intended to do something to me. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that they were up to no good. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling those encounters had left me with. I found myself looking over my shoulder everywhere I went, wondering if someone was watching me. My normal routine felt tainted by fear, and every drive home became a new adventure fraught with anxiety. To calm my nerves, I started taking a different route home each night, but the fears still lingered. I kept thinking about that rifle-wielding figure on the winding road and the odd behavior of those two men. Were they related? Were they part of a larger group? The questions spun in my mind like a never-ending carousel. A week later, I had a particularly grueling shift at work. I felt exhausted as I drove home, my eyelids heavy. As I approached the familiar stretch of road, the shadows seemed to close in on me. I turned up the radio, trying to shake off the unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. But the familiar tunes offered little comfort. Suddenly, I noticed a car tailing me. The headlights were bright, and for a moment, my heart skipped a beat. I recalled the incidents from just days before. I glanced at my rearview mirror and could see the driver, a heavy-set man with wild hair, staring intently at me. Panic set in again, and I instinctively pressed down on the gas pedal, determined to lose them. I took sharp turns and sped up, my pulse racing. I had to get away. As I drove, I could hear the engine of the car behind me revving up, trying to keep pace. My thoughts spiraled out of control as I turned onto another street. My mind was racing. Was this another ambush? Just as I thought I had lost them, I spotted the van parked at a nearby corner. My stomach sank as I realized it was the same one from that fateful night. They were waiting for me. In a surge of fear, I made a quick decision and veered down an alleyway, hoping to find a way to escape. The alley was narrow and lined with trash cans, but I pushed my little Civic to its limits, desperate to put more distance between us. My heart pounded as I maneuvered through the tight space. Suddenly, I heard the screech of tires behind me. They had followed me. In a desperate bid for freedom, I found myself navigating through the twisting alleyways, trying to find an exit. My mind raced with thoughts of what might happen if they caught me. I couldn't let that happen. I could see my own reflection in the dark windows of the buildings I sped past, and the fear etched across my face was unmistakable. Finally, I spotted a glimmer of light ahead and exit. I accelerated, heart racing, praying I could make it out of the alley. Just as I reached the opening, I heard the revving of an engine behind me, followed by a loud crash. My heart dropped as I turned to see their van had slammed into a wall, a miscalculated attempt to chase me down. In that moment of panic, I darted out onto the main road, the city lights illuminating my path. I took a deep breath, hoping I had finally escaped. I glanced back and saw the van was no longer pursuing me. It had been brought to a halt. I drove as fast as I could, not looking back again until I reached my neighborhood. Finally pulling into my driveway, I sat in my car, heart racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. I had narrowly escaped danger again. What were those men after? Why were they so determined to follow me? In the following days, I decided I couldn't let fear control my life. I went to the police to report the incidents, hoping they could investigate and keep an eye out for those strange men. They took my report seriously, but they also warned me that it would be difficult to track them down without solid evidence. Still, I felt relieved that I had taken action. It was a small step toward regaining control of my life. The more I thought about the encounters, the more I realized how important it was to trust my instincts. My gut had led me to safety more than once, and I promised myself I would continue to listen. Eventually, life began to return to normal. I learned to be more cautious and aware of my surroundings. I found myself driving during the day more often, taking familiar routes that felt safer. The memories of those terrifying nights faded, but they never truly left my mind. Years later, as I sat in my own home, a wife and mother now, I would sometimes tell my children stories of my youth, embellishing details to capture their imaginations. I would tell them about the freedom of that little blue Honda Civic, the beauty of the winding roads, and the lessons I learned about trusting my instincts. And every time, I would remind them that safety isn't just about the route you take, but also about being aware of your surroundings and listening to that inner voice that guides you. Those moments of fear had taught me resilience, and I hoped to instill that same strength in my children. Driving home one evening, the sun setting in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I found myself reflecting on those days. Life had changed so much, yet the thrill of the open road still called to me. I realized that while I could never erase the fear I had faced, I could choose to embrace the journey ahead, filled with hope, strength, and an unyielding spirit. As I finally drove home, my mind replayed the events of the night. I had always thought of myself as a cautious person, but in that moment, I realized how quickly things could turn dangerous. The peaceful drive home that I had cherished for so long now felt tainted by fear. When I arrived home, I locked the doors behind me and leaned against them, breathing heavily. I made myself a cup of tea, hoping to calm my nerves. The quiet of the night surrounded me, but the memories of what had just happened lingered in my mind. That night changed me. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, paranoid about what could happen next. I avoided late-night drives and took different routes home whenever I could. I couldn't shake the feeling that those men were still out there, waiting for their next target. In the following weeks, I shared my story with friends and family. I wanted them to know that sometimes the road less traveled could be filled with danger. Their reactions varied, with some dismissing my fears, while others were genuinely concerned. But no one could understand the true weight of the fear I felt that night. Looking back, I realized that it wasn't just about the encounter itself, but about the feeling of vulnerability it brought to light. I had always seen the world as a safe place, but that night opened my eyes to the reality that danger can lurk anywhere, even in the most familiar places. I learned to trust my instincts and never to ignore the warning signs. Life is full of unexpected twists and turns, much like that winding road I had once enjoyed. Now, whenever I drive, I keep my eyes peeled for anything unusual. The night sky still captivates me, but the shadows hold a new meaning. Months later, I found myself in a different city for work. It was a chance to start fresh, to leave the memories of that night behind. But I was still cautious, especially when driving late at night. Each time I got behind the wheel, I remembered that terrifying encounter and the lesson it taught me. Driving home one night after a long shift, I noticed the darkness wrapping around me like a heavy cloak. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. As I turned down a familiar road, I glanced at the trees swaying in the breeze, feeling the weight of the past lifting slightly. Then, out of nowhere, I spotted a blinking light ahead. My heart dropped as old fears resurfaced, but this time, I took a moment to breathe. I told myself it was just a broken down vehicle, nothing more. I slowed down, approaching with caution. As I got closer, I saw a couple standing next to their car, looking distressed but not dangerous. They waved for help, and I realized that not every encounter would turn sinister. I stopped, rolled down my window, and offered to call for assistance. In that moment, I learned that while danger can exist, so can kindness. The road might be unpredictable, but it's also a place for connection. I drove away that night with a sense of closure, knowing that fear didn't have to control me. In the end, my experience taught me more than just caution, it taught me resilience. I could face my fears and still find beauty in the world. Life was still an adventure, and I was ready to embrace it one winding road at a time.